Abe here, and I wanted to let you know that if you're able, you can upgrade your small beans skill over at patreon.com/smallbeans. Here's why you should do that. If you pledge 5 measly beans a month, you get access to about half our podcasts that you don't get if you're just listening to the free feed. Shows include Star Trek The Next Futurama, Spiel Boys, Like Razor Blade Pie, and bonus episodes of I'll Show You Mine If You Show Me Yours. Not to mention bonus content including info and updates on the movie we're making, Papa Bear. Hey, where's all the reasons to not subscribe to Patreon? I can't find them. Anyway, back to the show. I love Halloween films. Do you like Halloween films? Films that were released on Halloween?
Well, you mean specifically horror films, or just with that release date?
No, just any Halloween film, a film that came out in Halloween.
That's a time I want movies to happen, so sure. Right? I'm pro movies all year, but I'm very pro movies around Halloween. Good
Can you
point.
name any Halloween films?
I'm assuming that I'm about to learn the movie I'm talking about today is a Halloween film. Is that?
Do you know that 2003 is In the Cut?
No,
is a Halloween movie?
That's insane.
They released it. They were like,
why?
You ghoulies and ghasties.
Wow. That's weird.
Let's get out of here.
Everything about this movie is so weird.
It's a weird movie.
It's a really weird movie. I saw it in the theaters, Abe. Like, I saw it in the theater, and like, I can't believe that. Why did I see this in the theater?
Why'd you see it in the theaters? I don't know why I should second. It did pretty well. It didn't do terrible, but like for a movie like this,
yeah, right. For
like this is not
indie noir, yeah,
indie thriller.
Yeah,
it's got a good cast, but not like A-list. Maybe it's Meg Ryan.
Meg Ryan
not
was
usual
post A-list at this point.
Happy, smiley self that she was known for.
Oh, definitely not. She also this is like I think Mark Ruffalo's first big movie, so he wasn't a guy yet.
Jennifer Jason Leigh is never truly broken
not a big
into
draw.
the A-list.
Yeah,
Kevin Bacon is barely
he's
in
around.
it.
Yeah, he's around the movie.
He's not even on the poster though. Because he's just barely there.
He's well cast as a misdirect.
Mm-hmm.
I like that idea.
The important one is the Jane Campion.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, but I don't think even she scanned as a big name at this point.
She never truly did.
Yeah.
I mean, the piano gave her
Piano's great.
A lot of power.
Yeah.
But that was 1993. This is 10 years later. About as much time has happened since this film and The Power of the Dog, which came out in 2021.
That's wild too. Yeah, this film, she kind of took some time off, which we're going to talk about. Anyway, this is Directorpiece Theater. I'm Adam Ganser.
I'm Abe Epperson.
Yes, and we're the yucks that talk about your favorite films and the art of directing.
So you brought us a little theory.
I did. Yeah. Let's just jump right into it.
After watching this movie, you're like, hey, it's pretty clear that this movie is about subverting the male gaze, correct?
Yes, that wasn't my impression of it when I left the theater in 2003. I could tell you that, but now as a slightly older and slightly wiser man, that seems a lot more obvious.
Clearly what they're doing.
Yeah, I think so. I definitely think so. So let's talk about In the Cut, a movie that probably people remember for things that are not what the movie's about. I guess I should lead off and say this movie requires kind of more of a mature audience than most films in its genre. And actually it's not even that easy to place in a genre because like you called it a thriller. It's definitely a thriller. People in the reviews were calling it a psychosexual thriller, which is honestly somehow more vague than any genre term you could put on it.
Yeah, because I just don't know what that is.
Well, I think you think it means that it's going to be Basic Instinct or something. You know what I mean? Like or like Sliver or something Sharon Stone would do specifically.
Your Stones.
I know my Stones because like that's kind of what that genre became in the 90s, like the there's that great podcast out there, You Must Remember This, that's covered all the sexual cinema of the 90s recently. And like, yeah, all that stuff. And that's really not what it is, but it's definitely what people think it is. Some people called it an art house drama, which when you watch it does make some sense, but it isn't that either, because it's definitely a crime film, which is why, just to be clear, we're going to talk about it as a neo-noir film. And specifically because I want to talk about the tropes of noir films and how this movie is intentionally
I'm interested
messing with that.
Also, because Power of the Dog got a lot of flack for being like, you chose the Western genre, but you like abandoned all the tropes. This is kind of separate from this because there's a lot of noir tropes happening.
Absolutely. Yeah, but very unique explorations of them, which is why I thought it deserved to be here.
Baby.
Yeah, she's a great director. I really like her work. I want to talk a little bit about how she works when we get into it. So
let's get into it.
By the way, did you like the movie? Did you enjoy it? Did you like?
I thought it was fine.
Fine. Yeah.
It's not my cup of tea.
Yeah.
But it's also, I don't
like. It's not a bad movie.
The structural aspect of it, like the formal aspect, I get real hard for structure and form in movies. When you are, that happened right at the midpoint. I know where this is going. That makes me have glee. What less I have glee about is the characters and how they talk.
So
this
that
is
felt
definitely
a little
out of my
forced.
It feels super forced to me.
Okay, that's
and
interesting.
I just don't like them.
And
therefore I'm out of the movie.
That's interesting.
But I mean, that's true with a lot of films.
No, sure. I didn't think it all totally hung together. Like, I think the whodunit of it all is not great.
It's fine.
It's fine.
It's fine.
It's fine. So like, I don't want to like come out with a full-throated endorsement here and be like, this movie fucking rules. But I do think it's excellent at a few things that make it like better than an average movie for sure.
I agree.
And often we try to find movies that are flawed or sort of forgotten for exactly this podcast. So I think you're telling me I did great.
You did great.
I accept that. So In the Cut is probably most remembered in the public consciousness for nudity. That's the truth. Because Meg Ryan, she had done some nude stuff before, I'm pretty sure, but this movie, she did an extended nude scene in it. It's very memorable. It was at a later stage in her career when she was around 40, I want to say. So like, it's a pretty bold move. There's
a lot of hog in this film too.
Yes, yes, there is also penis in it, a thing we're going to talk about for sure. But what I find interesting about that is that, and you can, by the way, if you go and look at the reviews, the nudity is always the first thing they talk about. I think that a lot of these movies where you get,
that's interesting.
Yeah, when you get like a really well-known star who does nudity, the film is perceived as being a lot of nudity. Like, this is a lot of nudity. And like a great example from recent memory is Poor Things, right? Poor Things, Jimmy Kimmel did the joke at the Oscars about, they showed like a minute clip from Poor Things, and he was like, that's all the footage we can show on TV from Poor Things, which pissed Emma Stone off, because there's only like 3 minutes of nudity in that movie. It's just that it's pretty intense, and it's Emma Stone, so it's like, whoa, like it's just not what you expected. Also, more Ruffalo hog, so there's that. Right.
There was we had the same conversation with Oppenheimer hog.
Yes.
They were just sitting there for like less than a minute, and everyone was like, "There's nude scenes," and it's like, not really.
There's not a lot of nudity in Oppenheimer, but I would make the argument that people would be annoyed to hear. But I would say that nudity is more frivolous than either of these movies that we're talking about.
Nudity is frivolous in general.
Oh, that's an interesting point. Wow, I don't think that, but.
Put on some clothes.
That's interesting. So Abe also knows, and I guess I'm willing to talk about this in the podcast, my second student film, I did nudity.
Oh, yeah.
And like, so I have like strong opinions about when and how.
You're a big nudester.
Yeah, big old nude boy. No, I did one film that had nudity, and I've done some that had implied nudity since. But like, it's a whole thing to do a nude scene. It's not an easy thing, and it's weird how much it sort of conquers people's impressions of the movie and how it reduces the movie to just it is a nude scene basically. Like even a positive version of this conversation, Jennifer Lawrence's movie last year, No Hard Feelings, the only thing people talk about is how funny, how actually it's very funny, the nude scene that she did, right? Like, look, it's very funny, but it's still this way of like reducing everything in the movie to her choice to do nudity.
Daring. Yeah,
right.
Yeah, no, but that's like a positive version of, because at least it's talking about what's happening in the film. It's not just talking about, look, the boobies.
Yes, it's not pure lurid, but it still is telescoping the film to be less than what it actually is. And I feel that with this movie In the Cut, the nude scenes, like the way we talk about them, has actually missed what they're about and what's interesting about the film. So that's part of what I want to talk about. This film is also interesting in that it's one of the only films I can think of immediately that asks us to hold two fundamentally opposed experiences in tension. And those experiences are a kind of hopeful outlook that there is more to the world than how it seems. Like, sort of, there's a joy to this movie. There's an underlying beauty in this movie that's contrasted all the time with this crime, decaying, lust, stifling world that it takes place in, and never really reconciles that tension. They just both exist at once. And it exists from frame one, right? Like, we have this version of Que Sera Sera where they're hitting minor chords and showing these discordant images, but it's still kind of beautiful and poetic, and like that kind of never stops. You know? Yeah,
it reminded me a lot too of, you seen that Chungking Express?
Yes.
That was 90s.
Yes.
And like, even though that was even more of a stylized film, they have like Lens Baby stuff. Like, I'm thinking about at the end when she's walking up to Mark Ruffalo.
The Lens Baby stuff is great in this movie.
It makes it feel like a dream world. It makes it also distorted in like a fantastical kind of like, oh, we're in a fairy tale here?
I'm
like,
for sure going to talk about the Lens Baby as a tool, because it's a tool that people don't know what it is. Like, so even you and I casually referencing it, most people have no idea what that tool is, but we are going to talk about it because it's an important tool for this movie, and it's also rarely used. Anyhow, so I'm going to jump into it, Abe, if that's all right.
Hit me with your
my big stuff. Like, the thesis statement for this theory is essentially that In the Cut is an early example of the female gaze being put onto a movie where traditionally we had male gaze, in like onto tropes that are traditionally male gaze tropes, and specifically is finding a way to humanize the femme fatale character. We've seen movies, many of them, by the way, that were noir films, but from a female perspective, that didn't do this. Like Fargo. Fargo doesn't do this, right? But it's that's a female protagonist in a noir film, and it's great,
right? But it sees everyone is like more or less sexless for the
pretty much
for the crimes. Like, Frances McDormand is pregnant. She is a woman.
She's still female.
She has a life.
Yes.
But like, when she goes and solves crimes, there's nothing male or female about it.
We're not exploring that much. Yeah, it's very neutral.
You're just a cop doing cop stuff.
Right. And that has its own merits, and I respect a lot of those choices. This movie wants to unflinchingly look at femininity and like talk about that experience in the world of noir, and that's interesting. So we talked a little bit about Jane Campion. If you don't know who she is, she just won the Best Directing Oscar a few years ago for the movie The Power of the Dog. She's had a great career. She's told lots of period piece films, lots of female-centric stories.
That's a killer joke, dude.
What?
What? A lot of female-centric stories? It's a lot of period work?
Oh, damn. Wow.
You dirty dog.
I didn't mean that, but thank you, Abe.
No, I know what you mean. Yeah, she does a lot of work in the eras.
Wow, Abe.
I just couldn't help myself. That's funny.
You couldn't. Anyway, movies you'd probably know from her. The Piano is probably the biggest one of her early work, and it's great with Holly Hunter. It was up for Best Picture. She won Best Actress. Portrait of a Lady was her follow-up with Nicole Kidman and John Malkovich. And then she took kind of a long break after In the Cut and did a few things like shorts and stuff. But her next really big feature that everybody heard about was Power of the Dog from 2021, which she won a directing Oscar for. She also did a TV show. I think it's called Top of the Lake. That was kind of it was a limited series with Elizabeth, the woman from Mad Men.
Moss?
Yes. Is
that it?
Yes. And that's also very good. She's a great director. Also, her shorts are really rad. Like her 80s shorts are really cool. You should go and check them out.
She's a Kiwi too.
Yeah.
Lena Wickshep.
Yeah. Actually, funny
I
enough,
know.
Abe and I don't know if you had this directing class, Abe, but when we went to USC.
I did, yeah.
Oh, great. So you remember this. So they showed behind the scenes footage of Jane Campion working on the movie Portrait of a Lady. And like they had this great documentary that was just sort of watching how she works. And one thing she does that you don't see a lot of directors do is she sort of runs takes where she's kind of figuring out what else is possible in the scene. Like she's really just letting the actors figure out what they want to do with the scene and what it could be. And that method of working, she's extrapolated that all the way to like, there's footage of her from Power of the Dog going out with like a viewfinder and the actors in full costume and just like making up scenes. You know what I mean? And it's like fucking awesome. It's like, wow, I've never seen a director do that.
Yeah, I've never had a set where I had the freedom of that kind of time to work.
No, she builds it. That's
she
her plan.
She builds control so that she can do that, and that's fantastic.
Yeah, she also has this great quote in this documentary that I think is it's just a really interesting way for a director to work, which is she was reading Portrait of a Lady and somebody told her, so like, I can't wait to see what you're going to do with it. And she's like, oh yeah, what am I going to do with it? Meaning like she doesn't have this like pretentious mind's eye idea of what the film is going to be. Like it's a series of decisions she makes. And I'm like, yeah, that's like completely valid. Because a lot of directors talk about the film as though it all plays in their brain the minute they read the script. And that's just not true. You know, like I think Jane Campion understands that filmmaking is a process that you are interacting with and reacting to, you know, and I think you see that in her work. It's very cool. So the point of this, you know, divergence is that her style of work kind of suggests that her underlying, some of her underlying ethos is curiosity. She always wants to like skin things down to like their emotional core. And because of that, her films tend to be not as technically precise as, say, like a Fincher film where every frame of it is designed, but they tend to be more emotionally raw and surprising. You know,
it also means that it's like she seems to have, she errs on the side of deconstruction.
Yes, absolutely.
Especially genre informs, which is true through her career. She's always kind of, I think the proof is in the, like what you started with, is that this is a kind of a noir. It is kind of a thriller. It is a little bit of, but I couldn't put my finger on exactly what genre it is because it's like a hodgepodge of many of the things, but also random tangents because she just wanted to go there.
Yeah, and she understands, like, I think she never loses sight of what is interesting, and her instincts on what is interesting are always right.
Right.
You know, like, I think she really does know, even if it doesn't fit into a plan, how it can make a great film. She's great at that. Anyway, In the Cut is a pretty big departure for her because it's one of her only contemporary films. It's also like a film that she took a break from filmmaking after this, which I think suggests, I can't say this for sure because I didn't read any interviews to this effect, but you know, that maybe she wanted to like rethink about what she wants to do after this film. I think that though I have no research, I think she really did want to get into the genre stuff here. And my theory is based on observations only of the film, not on interviews with her. So yeah, that's all the background I think we need to do. So, noir films, I would argue, are in general probably one of our strongest pillars of male gaze in cinema. In fact, if you think about what male gaze is, a lot of times what you're imagining is stuff that you've seen in noir films, right? Specifically, the idea of damsel in distress, who may or may not be dangerous or a liar. That trope, the femme fatale trope, it, you know, wasn't necessarily invented by film noir, but has been codified there.
Yeah.
And it's a very male gaze trope, right? Like she is a person that cannot be known, the femme fatale. You don't know who she is. You don't know what she wants. Most of the movie is about trying to figure her out, pursuing her in a sense, you know? And the other part of like noir tropes that is very interesting for this, in terms of this movie, is that the men have a kind of self-reflexive view of themselves that is also dehumanizing in a weird way, right? Where you have like, these are all the characters who are like PIs are tough, hard-boiled dudes.
They always have a low version of themselves.
Absolutely.
And they place women on a pedestal.
Right.
She had
That's right.
legs for days. You know,
she
and
had
so
gams,
we already
right.
have we have this heteronormative kind of setup where it's not just being self-defined in a vacuum, but rather he has this opinion of himself and opinion of women. We don't see what she thinks. She just functions.
Well, we really would love to know what she thinks, but unfortunately the chasm of knowing is infinite.
Who knows what's going on in the mind of a woman?
I mean, kind of, yeah.
Film noirs say
Pretty much,
like, kind of, yeah.
Pretty much, they
yeah,
do.
because they're like, she was dangerous and beautiful, and that's all you needed to know about her.
Yeah,
because this is my movie, and my opinions are what
she was a
matter.
Friday in a world full of Wednesdays. Absolutely. So, like, the men though also have this reduction, but it's a reduction that's not quite as obviously silly.
Right.
And like that reduction is most men in noir films are like sad cowboys. In the sense that they are like wordless. They don't talk about their feelings. The world is grimy, but they know how to work it to their advantage. They know how to cheat. They know how to connive. They know how to get into spaces they don't belong. And if they're in this movie, they're going to figure out how to get through any locked door to get to whatever they want. Right.
Right.
That's still a weird reduction of what male people are. And we're going to talk about that in this film as well. So, though we've seen a lot of noir films where female leads are capable, they don't often subvert the tropes of femme fatale, right? Now, what makes In the Cut unique is that Meg Ryan's character, Franny, is actually kind of a hybrid PI/femme fatale character.
Right.
Because she gets approached pretty early in the film by Detective Malloy's played by Mark Ruffalo. About like, did you witness this murder, right? And the murder is pretty heinous. We don't see a ton of it, but it's like, a woman got disarticulated, I believe he says.
And some of her body
they
is
find
in
piece of her body.
Yard.
Yeah. It's very, it's very, serial killer at large, like, some kind of stabby maniac.
So she's both like, it starts with a probable suspect, but really she's trying to figure out the crime herself. And then on top of that, she needs the assistance of a PI.
Correct.
Because she's not the actual.
Correct. She
police,
might be in actual danger because of it. So in that sense,
exactly,
she is a femme fatale figure because she needs the detective to look in on her and save her from a series of dangerous situations that she in part created because of her curiosity, in part because of her sexuality, and in part because of, being a single female in New York. So we're kind of doing both tropes. She has to do some investigation to keep us invested in the plot, but ultimately she's not really trying to solve the crime so much as she's trying to find a way to feel both sexually satisfied and also to feel free of fear that she will be the next victim. Right. And in a sense, her inquiry is like, again, sort of self-reflexive, a thing that doesn't exist in either of these tropes often, right? And that sort of self-reflexive is she's looking into sort of, why am I both of these things? What does it mean that I'm both of these things? And that is interesting already, right? That kind of question exists in a noir film because noir films try to cut those questions out and make it as capery as they can. So, all right, now I want to talk about the female gaze from like the point of view of camera because that's the easiest place to see
what
it.
is that? How would you define what the female gaze is? Is it just
Good question.
Is it just a flip? It's just the feminine looking at the masculine and
great question.
All the tropes and things involved in that, or is it is it defined? And this would be a funny way. Is defined by the male gaze?
It's certainly a reaction
that's a big question, I
to
think.
the male gaze, no question. I think some of the fundamental criteria I get that I'm using to define it in this movie is the sense of how the same world that would show up in this crisp male gazy way in a normal noir film, how it's depicted in contrast in this film, right? And specifically, there's a world that is much, much more dangerous and you feel the danger of it. You feel the vulnerability of it all the time because this is a femme fatale character's point of view, right? So like the first way that you see that is the shaky camera work, right? Very few movies have shakier camera work than this. I'm talking like it's almost Blair Witch, you know?
Yeah, it's pretty rough.
Yeah, like even, and it's not structured in the way that, say, like when you watch an office comedy or something, right? The handheld tends to become invisible after a while until they make an intentional camera move that like reinforces some comic beat or some trope, right? The Office does all those punch-ins or comedy zooms. Abe, the zoom master, did it all the time at Cracked, right? So the problem with In the Cut is the camera never stops being visually present because they often look like they're not quite getting the frame they want. Right. The camera feels like it's always searching for what is the frame I'm supposed to get. A thing that when you're doing handheld film work, you're trying to eliminate as much as you can as a director. Like you do not want the feeling that the camera doesn't know where it's supposed to be. Right.
So it's basically a world of danger.
Yes. So what you get is this sense that the camera is going to miss something if it doesn't get the right frame, or that we almost saw it but didn't quite. Right? And that's already a pretty disruptive choice. But another thing that the camera does related to that is that we also lose focus. As in, like, sometimes the thing we're supposed to look at is not in focus. A thing that every film in the world is trying to avoid when they're doing handheld. And this film's like, yeah, sometimes things won't be in focus. No problem. Right?
Yeah.
And I would define that as what we might call a searching camera. Right? And the searching camera...
Yeah, it's voyeuristic.
Yeah, it's voyeuristic in the way a lot of handheld cameras are, but it's more than that in that the camera feels this anxious desperation to see something that may or may not even be there. Right? It is constantly searching the world for trouble and for danger, even if there isn't any, and it's heightened in that sense. Right? Now, a second aspect of this is the focal length. On this podcast, we talk about long lenses all the time. Right, so this won't be new, but it's rare to see a noir film shot this way. This is real long lenses. We're talking like, I don't know if it ever goes to a wide lens. It feels like it's on a 50 at widest ever.
Wides. Film noir loves wides.
Yes,
from a lot of their stuff, except when they do close-ups of faces because there's an emotional thing happening. That's like the premise of every shot: is how big is this? How important is the thing that? Oh, it's of a face. How important is that face? Oh, it's everything. Then it's a close-up. Oh, is there a gun in the drawer? Show the gun in the drawer because that's your Chekhov's gun right there, baby. It's like you only track the drama of the shot. Now, film noir loves to do this thing where in the in-between spaces, it's always wide because it's like you're playing a little bit of Where's Waldo? What's going on in there? Is there a clue over there? It wants you to be searching. A lot of mysteries, murder mysteries, like even things like comedies like Clue will do the same thing because a telephoto shot just compresses the space, so you don't have a lot of wall to look at, even if you're at a great distance.
Well, and a lot of times noir, and this is like these things go hand in hand, we're going to talk about them a little bit. A lot of times to compensate for these giant spaces and to direct the eye, noir films will put these really exaggerated, heightened lighting schemes so that, you have shafts of light and like big dark spaces and stuff to kind of, to keep our vision focused, but also to style and design these giant spaces. And this film chose interesting methodologies on both of those fronts. So on the lens front, we're on really long lenses, which of course heightens the shaky camera feeling and compresses the space. But the compressed space in this case also makes the feel like there's never a moment you're out of danger. Right? Like you're like, because it makes it feel like you're in this portrait where everything is close together, meaning there's no way around the possibility of this killer being just out of frame. And that, you get that feeling all the time. It also feels extremely intimate because a lot of times not only are we really close to the subject we're shooting, we're on a really long lens. So we feel the sense that like, boy, that, they're right in front of that billboard or there's something just out of frame. It could be an arm or whatever. So it feels very intimate, right? And I just kind of wanted to take a brief detour because I think this is just an interesting artifact. You never see Manhattan like this, ever. You never see movies where
No.
Manhattan looks like this. Specifically, this is like middle class Manhattan, right? Where like we're not in like a low income area or whatever where people are struggling to survive necessarily. She has like a pretty nice apartment, you know, like she's making a decent living as a college professor.
But it's not penthouse.
But it's not a penthouse, man.
Gordon Gekko.
Correct.
Shit.
It's not Friends. It's not Sex in the City, right? Like this is not a posh world. This is a believable, grounded New York. This is the New York people actually live in, right? And I think that feeling of this is how New York actually feels, which is in part created by location choices and in part by feeling the compression of the space, actually heightens the sense of danger. You know, like New York as a real city feels much more dangerous than New York in a movie does. You know, because New York in a movie is often very romantic. She kind of strips the romanticism out through her location and lens choices, right?
Yeah, and darkness and lighting. Like, it's not autumn in Central Park in this movie at any time.
That's correct.
You know, it's not Harry Met Sally. The other Meg Ryan Manhattan film.
And I think people sensed this but didn't fully appreciate it at the time because their like go-to comment about the film was how it felt very post 9/11. It's a very post 9/11 thriller, which, you know, in 2003 was a comment that made a lot of sense. And still does. But like I look back at it and say, sure, maybe 9/11 is a portal that opened the door to these things.
I don't really see it. I mean, I guess they want to show
it's a scary world.
New York is different.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, I guess it just means it's scary. But that's always Chinatown is scary but it's not, depending on how you look at it.
Yeah, it's not everyday run of the mill grimy like this is. Chinatown's still very sexy, you know.
This almost most of the film is night.
Right.
You're kind of the daytime walking across gardens and stuff like that. That it's the telephoto, so you don't see a ton of it, like you mentioned. And then the more expansive stuff, it feels like a sewer. It feels almost like a horror movie or something like that, or like a Jack the Ripper. I mean, it literally is kind of Jack the Ripper's tale.
Exactly.
So
that's exactly
right.
But
it feels like how they shoot London streets and like at hot, when there's no moon kind of thing.
Right.
That's how it feels.
Does. So this is where I want to talk about the thing that I know Abe was excited to talk about, and that is this focal length thing we're describing using the long lenses and the obfuscation is enhanced with a tool that the filmmakers chose to use called a lens baby. Now, what a lens baby does is it's a thing you attach to a camera, and it basically defines a small area of the focal plane that remains in focus, and everything else in the focal plane goes out of focus, which gives the feeling that there's little spots in the film that are in focus, but everything else is weirdly out of focus. Okay, now the most famous use of it, so if you can like imagine it in your brain if you haven't seen this film, the most famous use of it is probably Diving Bell and the Butterfly. They use it as a point of view shot from the guy who's in a coma, and it's like...
Who's in a coma and can barely see.
Yeah, it's a great... Because you really get the feeling of like how this tool works. It was also used in a really cool way in Tyler, the Creator's music video for the song Yonkers. There's a bunch of places, but those are two like big famous places that maybe you've seen.
If you ever watched the TV show Heroes,
did they use that?
The cop. There's a cop who has is Matt Parkman, I think is his name, and he can read into your brain like Professor Xavier, like I'm going to steal your thoughts or plant an idea. And when he does his kind of like brain at you, they move it. Not only
they actually shift the plane.
They actually shift it in shot like he's trying to like get inside, which is I thought that was probably pretty interesting because lens babies had existed for decades or so before even then, but no one had thought,
not in
what if
shot.
You just like actually in shot adjust it, and that's kind of
is kind of cool. I almost used one for a short film I did at USC, but it became very clear to me like this is going to slow us way down.
It's a very hefty apparatus.
Yeah, it's a hefty apparatus. You can mess up.
Since you're essentially moving shards of glass,
right.
That's a combination of shards of glass that are in front of the lens is how you're getting that blur to work for you. it means that like you touch it and you're like,
fuck,
there's
I
just
lost
something
the
about that
plane.
movement I
Yes.
didn't like, or
Yes.
now it's not covering all the space that I want to cover. So you have to really work.
It's
with
just
it.
a whole other operation that has to be done to get the shot, which adds just so much more time. It's like, so like choosing to use this tool means that you have to have a really expert film crew. So like weirdly, the effect of all these things is to create obfuscation, but it actually takes a lot of expertise and craftsmanship on the part of the cinematographer, the camera operator, and the director to use it at all. So it's an interesting tool for the effect that they're getting out of it, which I would define in two ways. The first is, I think the lens baby is used to make it so that we never get a clear sense of anything. Almost everything in the world is unclear on some level because of the lens baby. And I think that is a kind of window into our character's perception limits, right? Because because of her fear and because of her appetites and because of her sort of not wanting to believe certain things or wanting to believe some things that she shouldn't, her perception is inaccurate, right? Like her fear of Officer Malloy is sometimes like more heightened than it should be or less than it should be, right? And like I think the lens baby is a way of sort of communicating that her sight isn't as clear.
I think you're right about that fear.
Yeah.
It's like, as I've heard a lot of women mention, they're like, some of the scary shit is just walking down the street at night,
Right.
trying to get home, and I can't see like who's around me or what's going on, and that's a terrifying thing.
Well, and I also think
because
I mean, it is a physical danger, but it's also like a metaphorical danger in the sense that it's about not understanding the world you're in clear enough. You know what I mean? Like
there's some other thing that's determining
Yes.
the world that you exist in, and you have no control.
Correct.
Yeah.
So like another aspect of it, and this is an aspect I really like for this character, is there's a sense in which the limited perception is chosen, and the lens baby feels like a choice. Like you feel the director's choice in a sense. And what I get from that is we're enhancing the character's choice to exclude certain things from what they understand about the world, right? It's a chosen limitation of understanding. And I think that, I mean, and this is a little bit, grandstanding, but I think there's a sense in which every woman getting involved with a man they don't know is choosing to exclude certain, fears. Like I think that's a fundamental danger that Franny faces when she gets involved with Detective Malloy. Because she has to choose what things about him do I need to believe are a real problem and what things do I not. It also enhances the sort of poetic aspect of the film where Franny keeps seeing these like poetic messages on the subway, and they don't like add up to anything.
That's cool, but they usually are relevant to whatever's going on.
Right, and I think that the lens baby sort of is a way of saying that Franny chooses to keep those things as part of how she views the world. Right, she's choosing to bring that sort of deeper meaning into her world and not succumb to this sort of grimy, hopeless existence. And we have a character who kind of is not willing to do that. Her sister, who dies. And I think Campion has just chosen a really interesting tool to communicate the choice of what to think and feel and believe about the world through the lens baby. I really love it.
Yeah.
Also, by the way, there's a really cool shot right up top in this film. It's like the second shot in the film where she shows this like graffitied picture of a woman with two faces that's like split. And it's right when you get Que Sera the first time, you're like, what is going on with this movie? Right. And like this painting is very clearly like who our protagonist is. Like this is who our protagonist is.
Good old split face.
Yeah, she's like partly like a friendly, like there's a smiling sort of like, I guess, sincere aspect, and then there's a sexual aspect, and those two things feel like they're pulling each other apart.
Yeah.
And that's essentially what we're dealing with all the time in Franny's character.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, did I cut you off? Did you want to say?
No. I was just because I wouldn't say that it's like what are the two parts. I mean, it's true of every person. There's the sexual and the non-sexual part of you.
That is true.
But there's also like I guess it's just like what's at odds. I feel like in this movie is not as much like her. She's definitely grappling with like what like she finds sexual. Like we get that scene early on where she is basically a peeping Tom.
Yeah, she's watching a person get a blowjob. Yeah.
Right, where like you can definitely argue that that form of male gaze that they're trying to get us to talk about is very present in that, even though we don't often see male gaze movies where it's just like a dude watching like women have sex. Often it's the audience that is teleported there, where it's like, take a look at these ladies, like that's
100%.
where like the camera goes like scans up the body. We never do that to guys, and it's just interesting that there's kind of the camera itself has a gaze, and then there's the characters that can exhibit or express a gaze of some kind, and this movie doesn't seem to be taking the audience to task. It seems to be taking the particular character, her character. So I don't think she's the stand-in for all women.
No, I don't think she is either.
I guess what I'm saying.
I don't think. Yeah, I don't get some universal sense from this, but I do. The movie is unflinching about her being sexually curious,
right? When
it's not necessarily safe for her to be, and like that's kind of one of the main tensions of the film, and I think that's why people keep landing on sexual thriller as the way to classify it, because like
that's one movie that was less throughout the movie.
Yeah, and a movie that was a little less adventurous would just cut that out. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like she just wouldn't
want
those
to talk
things.
about that. This is what this movie talks about.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, I mean, one last thing, and I know this is like pretty obvious, but it's really important, is that this camera, all these camera choices also add up to constantly giving us the idea that we're looking from a point of view that we're not from a person we don't know. Mm-hmm. Like we really feel strongly we're looking from point of views and we're like expecting to see a person there. And sometimes we do, most of the time we don't, which gives us the sense that Franny is constantly being watched by people. I think that is true. She is constantly being watched by people. But the movie never clearly delineates for us the moments where that's not happening because it's constantly doing it. And I think that helps us get a sense of her psyche as well.
I think that's well crafted. I think these are very good visual strategies.
It's so smart and so invisible to a movie audience, but you feel it powerfully, I would argue.
Yeah, you definitely get like locked up in this kind of frustration, which is really effective. Frustration is one of the top things that I want my audience to feel when I'm in
especially in a noir film. Absolutely. Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about lighting. Noir lighting, I think we all could like imagine it in our head, hard light, lots of shadows, pools of light and stuff. In the cut still gives us the effect of noir lighting, but without any of the drama or motivation that we would normally get for noir lighting. Instead, it feels like it's entirely practically lit, excuse me. Manhattan apartments in real life are not well lit. And the reason they're not well lit is like, they have small windows, they're small places, they're usually kind of dingy, right? Mm-hmm. And they have like obscure corners and stuff. And Campion, again, because she's very smart, was like, why don't I just light it the way it would look if I didn't light the apartment well, the way most apartments are? That would give a really unique noir look. And she's absolutely right. It's like a grounded noir film. And I really think the groundedness of all of her choices enhances the feeling of anxiety that this film gives you, because it doesn't feel like it's too fantastic.
Right.
And I think we all instinctively know this is not a safe world, and the movie refuses to sort of take that illusion away. Right. She also pumps up all the saturation in the film, which is like, you don't see that in noir films too much, unless they're like trying to do period.
Yeah, I'm thinking of even just a few years later with Zodiac. I think that was 2006 or whatever. Yeah, I mean that's a Fincher. Maybe that
Fincher
one doesn't
loves
count.
To burn stuff down. Yeah, exactly.
But like, it's like when neo-noir was a big deal in the late 2000s. Also, the horror movies were, and Harry Potter's.
Right.
And we got this
all dark.
And we got the digital intermediate taking storm, Lord of the Rings, kicking ass and making it feel like a storybook. So you had all this control. Saturation kind of went... Saturation that was just transparent saturation, where there wasn't like a tinge. It wasn't like, okay, but like this is a world of blue or this is a world of yellow, like traffic or some shit. Like we didn't care.
Everything's one color. Yeah.
We did all that and then we would saturate.
Exactly.
But we wouldn't do like transparent, like no baked in color look where it's just like, what does it look like? Well, it looks like blues look like blue and reds look like red and blacks look like blacks. That to me, but then saturating it, no one was doing that.
It's very surprising.
Really.
I think it's another way that Campion is introducing the idea of the world being irreducible. You know, like the world is not just this grimy decay of crime. It's also still hopeful. There's beauty in it. There's desire in it. There's connection in it, even though it's hard to find. Like, and I just think that's such a bold thing to put into a crime film like this.
That's interesting. I thought it was more misdirection, where it's like
it does that
at
too.
Other people's lives outside of yours, they look more beautiful than you ever think that yours can look.
That's
and
interesting.
It kind of speaks to the depressiveness of our character.
Yeah,
but that's my read.
Her world is never super pumped up, as opposed to her sister's, which does feel a little bit more like a fantasy. But I kind of think that there's an aspect of Franny wants to live in a world where there's more hope in it and more passion and like. I
think the contrast is the thing. I think you're right.
Yeah,
I think that's right.
And I just again, I love that duality that doesn't quite hang together as like one look. And again, like I'm not criticizing Fincher for this, but Fincher's the kind of guy who would never do that. Fincher would design it so it looks one way and the movie feels like, yep, this is the movie. And I kind of like that. So now I want to talk a little bit more about the nudity. Having watched this a couple times now, the nudity is basically in one sequence. Okay, like the scenes that people remember, it's basically one sequence. And there's something interesting about it because the first scene is a very standard seduction scene. Right? It's like people take their clothes off, they start having sex. It's like, sure, okay, sex scene, I get it. But then...
Get over yourself.
Yeah, you get it. But then they have this really interesting scene where they stay naked and talk in bed for a while. And they talk about, like, Officer Malloy's first sexual experience. And that nudity feels much more grounded. Sort of like the Manhattan that they're in, like sort of like the lighting they're in, where it's like this is how people who've actually just had sex treat their bodies after this. Right. They don't necessarily get dressed right away, especially if they want to have sex again.
Romantic. They're not moving in a way that is like to try to make someone want me.
Right.
It's just cavalier.
It's casual and intimate. You know what I mean? It's informal, and there's an authentic sort of feeling to it, and it's actually where the most exposure happens in the movie, right? Where you're seeing the most of their bodies, but because it's not being used in a way that's intended to like eroticize, it's instead like this is where we're really getting to know their relationship and whether we can trust this guy. And so like I think it's actually much more powerful and emotional, which is why the nudity feels more potent there. You know what I mean? Like the fact that it's so casual, it actually makes us feel a little like now we're watching a thing we didn't expect to watch. So we remember it, right? It's got a frank feeling to it. The way that like the scene where you watch Juliette Binoche undress is it Juliette Binoche? I think it is. In Blue Velvet? Who am I thinking of?
Binoche? I don't know how to pronounce it.
I think I have the wrong actor. It's a different person. The actor from Blue Velvet. David Lynch film.
Fucking Blue Velvet.
It's a great movie. So that scene where she undresses is very like, there's a way you imagine it's going to go. That's not what it is. It's a scene where you clearly are peeping in on somebody who doesn't know they're being watched. And that feels awkward. But that frankness kind of, again, it removes what I think is a traditional facade of male gaze. And that facade is like, this is sexy. They want to be seen. Like this is and like sex has
pouring it up.
Sex has its place, and when it's over, we get dressed again, back in our suits. You know what I mean? And like that frankness kind of removes that, and instead gives us a more authentic look into intimacy, and also undermines the cop trope that we get from our PI, Officer Malloy. Right? Like he's very vulnerable and is a pretty rounded person, and actually sensitive in a lot of ways because of that scene. right?
Yeah, it shows that he is not, because we are introed to him when he's having a conversation with Rodriguez or whatever it is.
His partner.
The eventual spoiler, very key part of the crime.
Right.
So we know that he's a piece of shit. He comes in and he's just lobbing generic misogyny toward her. And Ruffalo's just like, yeah, I fucking hate women.
Right.
You know, like,
yeah, you get it. Yeah,
and
exactly.
so we're like, so we get this. We already have had this scene where she's like, they had a really sexually charged flirtation, and then it jumped to, oh, he's actually a piece of shit. And then we get him again being like a really earnest, like just wanting to be with you and be in this with you. Kind of. Like, it's not general. We're making Mark Ruffalo a very complex character.
And
you know,
they're doing
it's
it
like what you were saying about the red flags have to be kind of disregarded for her to.
She has to choose what part of the identity that he has does she believe, you know, and because the movie doesn't romanticize those choices or like charge them up in a thrillery way, like you know, there's almost an ambivalence about it. You know,
it's definitely, it's so funny. This is, the more you talk about it, the more I'm like, this is an Adam Ganser jam. Like the fact that it's like, it's not one thing. It's everything's complex.
Yeah.
It's not,
I do
it's
love
not like
that.
He bad because that, she good because that, you know, like you don't want to play this black and white. You just want the gray, baby.
I do. I love the gray, but also like, and you know this, making a successful gray movie is almost impossible. Because like
it's really hard.
Yeah, the audience
can't tell the audience what to think.
Right.
You can only nudge them as close as you can.
Right.
And if you do it too hard, you're often criticized for trying to hold people's hands, and you get, you know, like it's a very hard thing to do.
You just lose people when you make a movie that's morally ambiguous or complex. You lose people because there's a percentage of the movie audience that doesn't go to movies to be challenged emotionally or intellectually. They go to movies because they want to have a good time. And they want the story to be clear-cut and enjoyable.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, actually, like, funny enough, I just watched Civil War over the weekend. Did you watch that movie?
I haven't yet.
Okay, well, I don't want to say too much other than I think that's a movie that I think the director in his heart wanted to do something more complicated than he was able to do. Like, I when I look at it, I'm like, yeah, I see the Alex Garland complexity that wasn't allowed to be. And I think
I've heard this about that movie.
Yeah, because he likes ambiguous films. It's one of the things I love about him. I think he's a great film. Right. He's very good at this. You know, but this is so that's off topic. I don't want to get too far down the road. Abe is absolutely right. I love ambiguous films. I tried to make many at USC. I only think I succeeded making one or two that were good at this.
That's funny.
You know, and the stuff that was less ambiguous and more like, hey, here's some jokes and some fun. That stuff worked out for me. So
it always works.
Well, you know, I guess. Anyway,
I guess.
Yeah. Well, and also like you can't fight it, man. Like you got to know.
It definitely was my life for the next 20 years.
Well, I mean, I've been working with a director on this doc, and like one thing he's excellent at is never flinching from this is the emotional thing to do. Let's do that. Like he's so good at that in a way that I'm like, that's so obvious. But like he's right. It works. You know what I mean? And like I guarantee you people are gonna come up to me after the doc and be like, man, that was fucking great about things that I think are a little schmaltzy because because that is what people want. You know, and you have to
clear indications of what they're supposed to be thinking and feeling about
the characters. So they can feel that, you know?
And there's a part of you, there's a dog inside you that you're like, the world isn't that though.
Yeah, I want you to have to work, you know, like, and I love Jane Campion for that. I love that she does that. I think she's so great at filmmaking, and I love that. Yeah. Anyway, so I just want to wrap it up here. So I just want to be clear. I'm not saying the female gaze is only about being in danger. But I am saying that the femme fatale character is a character that's being defined by having to navigate a world that is stacked against them. And I think that trying to do this that way means that we have to look through the lens of danger all the time. right? And that's what I think Campion was trying to do, and I think she did it really successfully. I also think she made some interesting statements about sexuality and its relationship to, like, when do you actually know if a person's real or not? Like, if they're legit or not? Like, actual intimacy, when does that happen? And, like, what do you have to exclude to have sex with a person? You know, like, especially in a world where people are, maybe dying or maybe criminals. That's an interesting problem that she explored, I think, really meaningfully. I think Campion is just a really great voice who knows where the most juicy, interesting things are and is willing to do anything to get them. And like that is an undervalued commodity in film. I love her work. I think she's so great. I do think this film is flawed, so anybody that watches it, it's going to be like, well, it didn't totally like work. I agree. It doesn't totally work. I think she probably does too. I didn't hear that from her, but I wouldn't be surprised if she thought that. But I love the attempt. So that's my theory.
Do you think that she should have included a scene where Meg Ryan is in her apartment looking at a whiteboard that says Mark Ruffalo, pros, cons? Do you think that
maybe a dancing
that would have helped
boxing
with the clarity?
Scene? Yeah,
maybe people would have gone to the movie.
There's some lines in there that are a little bit clunky the later in the film we get. It doesn't all hang together. Like, some of her choices are a little bit like, look, this woman's smarter than this. Like, she wouldn't have done this.
That's what I like about it, is that they show that she has a very practical mind about things.
Right.
Just how she talks to Jennifer Jason Leigh, who's her sister-in-law. Jennifer Jason Leigh is a very feeling, thinking, let's go with the flow. What's happening tomorrow? I don't know. She's practical, which always applies to, like a detective type. But she's just like, I don't care about that shit. I don't do that. There's one of the first moments she has with an interaction is there's like a family they're walking down the apartment, and like she doesn't say hi. She just kind of nods.
Right. She's kind of hey,
Jennifer
okay.
Jason Leigh slams her for it. She's like, that's your people, that they live right under you, kind of thing. Like, why are you weird about it? Just say hi. I said hi. Why don't you say they said hi? You're the only one not saying hi. And it's just like one of those things where she's like, I don't care about any of this. What you're talking about is nonsense to me. And I think that is kind of good in showing that the character is very practical, which is, there's a hypersensitivity to the danger.
Yeah, she's very careful. Yes.
She's very careful, very it also is distrustful. She's like looking at the world as a like, I don't know these people anything, because secretly deep down she thinks that the human animal is like a corrupt one that might be out to get her. And it just shows you that those little dictations, while albeit small and not really like a signpost or a very clear postcard of exactly thematically what's occurring here, the subtext is very loud and clear if you just think about it for a second. That's the kind of films that Jane Campion makes.
Absolutely.
It's excellent. I much rather that than, pro or con Mark
I think
Ruffalo.
she's also good at unwrapping what a male, what men are, and showing how there is complexity in men that is both threatening and benign. You know what I mean? Like The Piano has some of the best work on that front ever. Harvey Keitel's character is like, wow, in that movie.
Yeah, he's an interesting one.
Yeah, very interesting. But like, I don't want to spoil this movie entirely, but like, essentially there's a series of men that Franny has relationships with, like, friendships or people she meets or whatever. And all of them are dangerous in some way or the other. Like, all of them could be the person who's out to kill her.
They could be that's what's funny, is it could be a love interest, could be the serial killer.
Right. And that seems very silly when it's described like that, but I think one of Campion's skills is being able to make that feel true.
Make it feel more of a vulnerability as opposed to a sketch premise, which is what I'm saying.
Right. Well, the way, of course, because that's what we do. But like, I do think there is something profound about seeing how even the benign insensitivity of a man in this context can feel deadly, or could be misconstrued as deadly.
Yeah,
You know what I
and
mean?
that's
Like-
why if you several times you see her say, you know what, fuck this, I'm out of here.
Right,
You know, because
right.
that's like kind of the right move in that moment.
She
because
has
you're
that
not.
she has that student who's like kind of just like a proto incel type, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like that's really his deal. He's like a little bit of a incel, but he says this
Yeah.
insane thing about how John Wayne Gacy maybe didn't do it. And it's like, what are you saying?
He's
know, like-
talking about like it's because I think that they're trying. It's the self-justification
Right.
at women, right?
Right.
It's
Right.
kind of the origin of the mansplaining kind of thing, but it's also
Absolutely.
like if you look at it from this angle, it's actually John Wayne Gacy's desire that caused him to do all that stuff. That wasn't the actual man. He didn't want all that stuff. And it's like, I see what you're saying logically, but ultimately what I'm really seeing is that you're like an apologist for John Wayne Gacy and trying to
Exactly.
explain away the idea that like he was
Exactly.
a woman-hating monster. You don't want that to be attached to in the way that it probably is. You want it to be something else, and you're trying to re-justify or re-explain the world in a way that is not actually congruent or necessarily true. You just want to control the world. That's the world that a lot of women live in.
Correct.
Where men are explaining that this is the case.
It's actually kind of fun to see a character like this in a world where all talking points haven't been defined into pre-existing categories.
Right.
Because we live in that world now where that character can't be that and be like morally ambiguous now. You know what I mean? Like, so you really
After
felt
Me
like a
Too,
sore
it's
thumb.
like very much so has to be.
Right.
Yeah,
And
and that's
a good thing in a lot of ways.
I think it's a good thing because it's. I see the world as fairly trend based. You know,
Absolutely.
And I think that will go away a little bit and it will come back, and that's we're just in that.
Of course,
because that's what kind of the society needs to. Persist.
I just kind of enjoyed the fact that character at that time, because of where, when, and how we thought about these issues then, could be seen as a morally ambiguous character with that viewpoint, because there's no way they could now.
Yeah, I think that's like kind of smooth brainy thought process. You know, I don't think that you can have a thing can be one thing and another thing. It, you know,
like it was being treated like it was the equivalent of having a Nietzsche poster in your room when you're in high school or something, and it's like, no,
should be a cliche, but at the same time, like it's fine if you like Nietzsche, that's fine. You can like Nietzsche and be fine. Is I guess what I'm coming down on. You can like Scarface and put a Scarface poster in. Still be a functioning human being.
One can.
I may fucking dunk on you on a daily basis.
Oh, that's like your favorite guy to dunk on.
Yeah,
you're bringing basketballs to every apartment just in the hope that they have a Scarface poster.
Yeah, I'm gonna bring a friend who just holds a hoop so I can just run up.
I'm the hoop guy. I just show up with the hoop. You see a Scarface poster?
Oh my god! Oh god! Look at it!
Yeah, that's what we should do. That should be our bit at every party. I go with the hoop.
Bring a basketball.
You go with the basketball. If we see something dumb, I just hold it up and you just go for it.
Yeah,
what a bit!
Break the glass.
God, we'd be heroes.
Effects.
We'd really be heroes.
These are great ideas.
Yeah, we always have them.
In the end, you know what else was a great idea? Watching this film and talking it with my buddy.
Yeah, what a good time we had. Hopefully it was useful.
I love the way you piece it together, and it's actually really funny because we record these two at a time before any of these come out, and the next one that we're going to talk about, apropos of nothing, I also wanted to discuss a film where I wanted to talk about the male gaze, and I chose Jennifer's Body.
Funny.
So if you want to watch along with us, go and watch that. That's a 2000 shit. I should have known this. What is that?
6?
What was it? 2009. I want to say 2009.
It's in the Diablo Cody
Karen
era.
Kusama and written by Diablo Cody. And it's interesting because I was a little worried when we started talking about this. I was like, these are going to be too similar. Not at all, because there's just so much to talk about in terms of Jennifer's Body weaponizing the male gaze in a way to use it against the audience in particular. Whereas what I think that Campion's doing is much more using it as an effective introduction of character and a way in which to frame the world and the flaws therein, and like how it kind of strangleholds the ways in which that person can navigate the world in this movie we'll talk about is that it's Diablo Cody directly. Like I don't think we'll ever say this, but I kind of think that this is what she believes, and this is just all me. But the way the film operates, it's almost like you, the one with the eyes. I got a bone to pick with you, and it's all in the name. It's called Jennifer's Body, and it's a horror movie. It's got Megan Fox in it.
You're just hyping your ep right now. I love it.
Let's talk about it.
Well, I'm excited about that.
In a month.
It's a shame that it's a shame we didn't get Maggie for that, because Maggie loves that movie.
Oh, she does? That makes sense.
Well, we talked about it on Isme, I think.
Oh, okay.
I think we did. Like, this is years ago. So I mean, hey man,
time ago.
different angle.
Well, it's going to go through a different brain, so I'm sure I'll get some stuff right and some stuff wrong. But yeah, look for that in a month or so.
Anyway, last little factoid about In the Cut to wrap this out. Meg Ryan was not the first person they wanted to cast in this role.
Oh,
it was Nicole Kidman.
Yes, it was.
Who had to back out for it might have been Eyes Wide Shut.
She's going through a divorce and she had to.
Right, it was because of Eyes Wide Shut. Right, it was the divorce.
Yeah.
So she stayed on as a producer of the film. Like she was credited as a producer of the film. That is cool. And actually, Meg Ryan is an interesting substitute for Nicole Kidman, because I think they do share a similar vulnerability. So I think Jane Campion had a pretty clear sense of what she wanted from the character.
Yeah, and they're both huge.
They're big draws. Yeah, you got to get big name for this. Yeah, absolutely.
Otherwise, this thing doesn't exist in the way that it is. It's got to have a draw at the theaters,
or we're not watching it. Anyway, hey buddy, what a pleasure.
What a pleasure, man. Talk to you in 1 month's time. Yes, this is how this works.
And not until then.
And not until then. Peace.